William Sullivan, or Sully, as he is known, is a 1995 graduate of the University of Connecticut. He's a retired college basketball coach living in Connecticut with his wife, Jennifer, and their children, Holden and Conor. As the world's greatest collector of friends, he can also be found hoisting the occasional pint in the corner pub with his brothers. I want to go to this corner pub. Tilting with Lips
Hey,
is
you've been
his
there.
Tilting with Lips is his second novel. Welcome to the program, Sully.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Sully, I always like to say that, uncorking the story is always about sort of the stories behind the story. So we are going to kind of talk about your most recent book, but I'm curious, where does your story begin?
I guess I could probably answer that question in 11 different ways. Since we're talking about the book, I guess the appropriate point for this story that we're going to talk about probably begins with me failing Drama 101 as a freshman in college. I feel like it was a bit of entrapment. They put me in towers and sent me to class Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning at 8 a.m. in Vondermaiden.
All right, so just a little inside baseball here for those in the audience who know nothing about the University of Connecticut, because truth be told, I went there as well. I had an 8 o'clock class in Vondermaiden, and I lived in Colt House for the first few weeks of freshman year, and then I got out of there because I wasn't in the marching band, and everybody else in my dorm was. That's not an easy trek to make across campus down to Vondermaiden that early in the morning.
It's it's about a mile, and it gets pretty cold in stores late October, November, and so that class became optional very fast, and I ended up not reading Hamlet for that class right before the midterm. I didn't know it was even going to be on the midterm, and years later, I read a book called The Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom that got me very interested in Shakespeare and kind of became somewhat the foundation of the research anyway for the story. I think like a lot of things, my mom used to say when I played high school sports, that boy's got a lot of quit in him. And so I think coaching, I've always come from a position of regret, like you want kids to put everything they can into it. And I think this book kind of came from the same place where I didn't take my education seriously enough because I was young and a knucklehead. And so there were a lot of things I wanted to learn about later in life, and Shakespeare happened to be one of them.
At what point, like in time in your life in general, did you think, hey, I think there's a book in me? Was it later in life? Was it a dream when you were younger? Or?
Yeah, no, the book was earlier. So the first book I wrote, The Summer of Calamari, was when I was 20. I got into a car accident. I had to take a semester off from school to raise some money to go back. And I spent a summer and then a fall on Block Island off the coast of Rhode Island. And I was 20 years old with no fake ID, which makes Block Island a really boring place. And so I wrote a lot. I used to work all day. I played there. I caught a good break. There were some guys that played hoop at Rhode Island that were out there. We played hoop until 7 or 8, and then everybody went out, and I used to go and write. So the first book I put together probably between ages 20 and 22, and then I didn't publish it until 2005. It was something my mom always wanted me to do. She passed away, and I wanted to get it done at that point.
Yeah. So tell me about just kind of the process of publishing that first book. Did you go the traditional route with it? Did you do a self-publishing?
Self-published.
Okay.
That one, and again, this is going back to my mom. She had actually found the publishing company and kind of challenged me with it. And so that's why I just immediately went through that company without a lot of research, just to get it in print so that friends and family could read it.
Right. And what was the response to that book? What did how well did it do?
I would say it was met with underwhelming apathy, probably is about the best way to describe it. Even the apathetic were underwhelmed.
Okay.
So it was, same kind of thing. A lot of friends and family enjoyed it. I didn't really put any marketing in place. There was a time when there was no social media, believe it or not. So that wasn't any kind of vehicle that I could use at the time. But really it was just like, it was something I wanted to get out there for personal reasons.
Right. Right. And I mean, in 2000, you said 2005?
Yep.
I mean, you don't really have like Kindle as a platform. Like e-readers aren't really the big platform, because really like independent authors, and I've published independently, we do really well on Kindle as a platform, and the e-readers as platforms. But it's tough kind of going back to those days. Getting into a brick and mortar store is probably unheard of if you don't have an agent representation, a big publisher behind you. So really the cards are stacked against you. But I'm curious, like, what did you learn about yourself going through that writing process and through that self-publishing process?
I guess by the time you get through with it, you learn that you have a story to tell, and I think most writers would tell you that you have to write from your own personal background. It's hard to go too far outside of it. So I think you find a lot of pride in being able to carve a fictional story out of the kind of snippets of your own life and the things that were really important to you.
Right. So like 30 some years passes between writing that first book, not publishing that first book, but writing that first book, and Tilting with Lips coming out, earlier. It came out last year, right? In 2021. Okay.
Yeah, just a few months ago.
So bridge the gap, what was going on in your life during that point in time, and kind of why so long in between books?
Children. So my son, my first son was born in 2006, and obviously the publishing came right before that. The writing had definitely slowed, and even reading went from kind of pouring through fiction to a shift to nonfiction whenever you could kind of squeeze it in to learn a little bit. And then that whole time I was coaching Division I college basketball, which doesn't leave a whole lot of gaps. We were fortunate. I never would have been able to do that without my in-laws, who were incredibly helpful. It was like my children had 4 parents.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly between the coaching and parenting, any kind of writing took a back seat. So I kind of got grooving again when I took a year. I was already researching the book, but the bulk of the writing, I feel like I got done in a year that I took off from coaching.
Right. How did you get involved in coaching? Because I know you mentioned you were an English major at UConn, right? Kind of how did you get into coaching?
Nepotism. So I got into coaching. I was teaching high school, and they asked me to coach JV soccer.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned into one of these people that when the bell rang at the end of the day and the kids are trying to like run down the hallway, I'm plowing them over, trying to get to practice. It was so much fun. And I love teaching special education. It was a great joy, but not nearly as much as I loved coaching. I've always referenced coaching as being in a classroom where you really want to teach, but all the students want to learn. Typical teaching isn't always that way, depending on what level you're doing it at. So I kind of fell in love with coaching there. I started coaching basketball in high school, and my wife got a head college job, and I had been coaching for a little while, and it was her first year, and their staff was kind of new and on the younger side, with the exception of one coach who had some background in it. And so we got home and we're just, we were talking a lot about basketball all the time. And so the following year, she asked me to come join her staff, and that's how I got into it.
Yeah.
College, anyway.
College.
Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So tell me about this book. So how did this, tell me just kind of in general, what the idea behind Tilting with Lips is, kind of how it came to you, and how you kind of took it from sort of like a seed in your head, to the written word.
Sure. The getting into Shakespeare was at the roots of a couple of, great books that I got put onto early. And so I started reading the plays. And as I got further and further into it, I started reading about Shakespeare's life and obviously when you're going back that far, there's generally holes in everyone's life. But when you look at some of his contemporaries, a Marlowe, a Kidd, a Middleton, those playwrights, there's at least some historical reference to them as playwrights. Most of what was written about Shakespeare was, had more to do with him as an actor, as a theater owner. There wasn't much reference to him as a playwright. So then there's this idea that came out, I think maybe about 150 years after he died, that someone else wrote the plays. A woman named Delia Bacon, who was a relative of Francis Bacon, starts opining that Bacon wrote the plays. And the more I researched it, the more interesting it became, this mystery around it. And so the roots of the book came from that. And then the other thing I did to play it really safe is I put the mystery in the hands of a bunch of novices, because, I just coaching basketball full-time, not teaching Shakespeare full-time. I just really don't have the vocabulary or the breadth or depth of knowledge to be able to put together something in nonfiction. So I took that angle to kind of cover myself a little bit and some of the tracks that may have been, a little amateurish for sure.
Right. Yeah. Because some Shakespearean scholar is going to crucify you, for getting a fact or detail wrong or something like that. But
and it's funny you say that. Yeah. Sorry, I was lucky to have that happen late in my time at the University of Hartford. The chair of the English department, a guy named Robert Logan, who studied at Harvard, wrote books about Shakespeare that I could barely understand. He kind of opened up his office and his mind to me a little bit, and we used to get in there and talk about, basically what should I read next? I'd read it and then we'd chat about it. And when I started talking about the authorship question, he referred to it as intellectual doodling. And I always enjoyed that, but I kind of went after him a little bit about, some stuff in Edward II from Marlowe and some Quincy, and he was great about it. I'm sure in some ways he was laughing at some of my ideas, but he was willing to keep talking about it, which was incredible for me to be able to have that experience, to talk to someone that erudite, that much background on all the, little kernels of knowledge that I would never glean from the stuff I was reading.
Right. So, would you characterize this book as a mystery? Is it like a comedic mystery, or how would you characterize it?
I would say comedic mystery is fair. I start out in a bar room with 4 high school friends that are now getting close to 30, having generally inane conversations about, the greatest hockey movie of all time, whether the Corleones could beat the crew from Goodfellas, that kind of thing. And I kind of take it over the top to paint a picture of how immature men can be when no one's watching. And so from that point, I try and bring them along and have them grow up through this mystery that they're handed.
Right. So I have to ask, what is the greatest hockey movie of all time? Is it Miracle? Is it what was the one with Paul Newman? And for some reason, Slapshot. It's one of the two, right? It's not Youngblood with Rob Lowe, right?
It is not Youngblood. It was a phenomenal goal from behind the net, but it was not Youngblood. Swayze was incredible, but it was not Youngblood, and it wasn't Mystery Alaska. But one guy does get put in timeout for suggesting that it could have been.
Mystery Alaska, not a horrible movie. It's not a horrible movie.
No, I think it's a good movie, but it's
I made the mistake of watching that. So my kids, I have 3 19-year-olds at home, and I can watch that movie now with them. But actually 2 of them are at UConn now. One of my girls was a hockey player. She played co-ed up until bantam year, and then she went to an all-girls team. But I made the mistake of when she was 13, turning on, Mystery Alaska unedited version. I said, "Oh, kids, it's a good movie." I saw it on TBS or something.
Sure.
And then I quickly learned, not necessarily a family movie.
And you're naturally illustrating my point here. If a couple guys get together, it immediately goes from Shakespeare to tangential conversations about hockey movies and nudity during the movie. Guys can't not do it.
We all have a little Mr. Skin inside of us. That's just the way it is. But would you agree that the greatest arm wrestling movie of all time is Over the Top?
Of course. I used to tell people all the time that the greatest movie about high school wrestling ever made is Vision Quest.
Oh, Vision Quest. Loudon Swain.
And it was because there were no other movies about high school wrestling.
Right.
And then the one with Giamatti came out, and I'm like, I might have to reframe this argument a little bit, but certainly arm wrestling is still over the top.
Well, I have to say, the greatest movie about high school wrestling featuring a Madonna song then would be Vision Quest.
Yep.
I
can't pass a pegboard without wanting to climb it. Now, I can't climb it, but I can't pass it without wanting to.
Wanting to climb. That's the key. Yeah. Wanting to climb it.
Yep. Distinction with a difference.
So, I mean, this kind of being your second book, your second novel, what was different about the writing process this time? And, you know, if anything about the publishing process this time, did you learn any other lessons about yourself as you went through this one?
I don't know that there were any like kind of key growth life lessons. I think that I was really proud of the research I put into it versus the first one, just kind of complete fiction. You know, the amount of time that went into it, some travel. My wife and I went over to England to kind of see exactly what I was looking at to be there. So that was a huge difference. And I think, like, you know, looking back, I'm really proud of the first book, but because I was 20 years old, it was like kind of juvenilia, where there were a bunch of sentences where it ended with, and he knew that would go on forever. You know, everything was like eternal. It's how you feel when you're 20. Like every decision you make is like the most important thing that's ever happened. You know, he chose that Coke instead of that Pepsi, and he knew forever this. And you're like, seriously, dude, did you really write that down?
You start to cringe. Yeah, it's funny. You look at some of that early, and I look at some. I mean, I have like 3 books that I'd never published that are just kind of sitting like early first tries at writing something. You know, like 3rd and 4th drafts of these first tries. I look at them and I'm like, oh, that will never see the light of day unless I die and somebody like hacks into, you know, a cloud somewhere and publishes it. It's never happening.
Yep.
Well, cool. I have a few questions here for you. First of all, before I ask, I call these the hot seat questions. I asked them of all my guests, trying to find some themes across these interviews. But before I do, I was struck by your Twitter handle, which is, why don't you tell everybody what your Twitter handle is?
Sure. So just very quick background. When I got down to George Washington, I finally had to succumb and go on Twitter so that I could follow all these different people. I was, you know, a big proponent that this was nonsense. And I got the group to agree that our theme for the season would be March all one way. And it's a quote from Shakespeare, but for basketball players, it's like, you know, March is the pinnacle of the season, all one way. So my Twitter handle was Bolingbroke 4 from the Shakespeare play. So at the end of that year, I stopped coaching. So I don't need this Twitter handle anymore. And now I'm going to be Mr. Mom. And so there's this great scene in Mr. Mom where Michael Keaton is trying to impress his wife's new boss, and she's coming to the house, and he's got a chainsaw and he's got goggles on. I'm going to do this whole big addition and add this and do it. And the boss goes, "Oh, you're going to wire it all out 220?" It's like 220, 221, whatever it takes. And so my Twitter handle is 220, 221. And then underneath it says whatever it takes. And of course, most people see this and they're like, oh, here we go with this like coaching cliche. They're going to do whatever it takes to. And you were one of the few people that got that has nothing to do with that.
Well, there are very few pop culture references that are lost on me. But
yeah, I also, I mean, you had to laugh a little bit right before that. The guy walks in the house and he's like, "Get you something, beer, 7 o'clock in the morning, scotch."
What was the name of the tuna company that she was putting together an ad campaign for?
Schooner Tuner.
That's right. That's right. With the great Martin Mull.
Yep. Tuna with a heart.
Tuna with a heart. Martin Mull, Terry Garr, Mike Keaton. Who else? Any other big names in that movie?
Probably.
You know, there's always those are the big 3.
That comes out 3 movies later.
Right. All right. Well, enough about Mr. Mom, but although that is one of my all-time favorite movies. So 8 hot seat questions for you. First one up is an easy one. What was your favorite TV show when you were a kid?
That's the easy one, huh?
That's the easy one. The rest are hard.
I watched a lot of TV when I was a kid, I guess a little bit older kid, I think Sanford and Son kind of cracked me up. And I liked Hogan's Heroes.
Hogan's Heroes, man. That's a weird story. You know, if you think about it, it's a comedy about guys in a German POW camp, you know, and I guess, you know, the joke is that the Germans are the joke, right? So I think that's how they get away with it. But I don't know in this kind of world if that premise would fly anymore, right? And then even him, Bob Crane, had he would have been canceled pretty quickly.
Yeah, Twisted Life, comical, tragical,
very comical, very twisted. With a young Richard Dawson in that show, if I remember correctly. Always groping people, of course, later in life on
Family Feud.
Family Feud. I will say, great host of Family Feud. Steve Harvey, pretty damn funny too. I'll watch it every now and then. So, all right, there we go. Hogan's Heroes or Sanford and Son. Question number 2. How do you feel when you're staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, depending on how you write?
Depends what I'm writing. There have been so many letters of reference over the years that sometimes those just write themselves. But I've been hammering out a couple ideas for possibly doing another book, and the start of that is completely overwhelming. You know?
Yeah. The
tabula rasa is no good. I don't think it was what Locke intended.
Do you like, for example, with Tilting with Lips, did you start with an outline first and then start writing, or did you just start writing and see where it took you?
Yeah, no, I was smarter about this one. I started with an outline. As I was going through and pulling together the research, I was just writing it all down in a notebook. Sometimes if I didn't have the notebook with me, I'd underline stuff in the books and then go back and transcribe it in. And the outline came in there, the buildup of the characters, the setup of the bar that they start out in, and how I was going to put the story together. All went into that, which definitely made it easier. It's like writing one short story at a time versus writing a novel.
Well, you know, the bar that they start out at, I'm curious, did you have a specific place in mind that you were drawing from?
Absolutely. A buddy of mine owned a bar. He was a part owner in a bar in Glastonbury, Connecticut. And that's where I set it. And his name is Jimmy Kelly. The bartender is Declan Kelly. And the bar is called Kelly's. And it was obviously an Irish pub. And that was I pictured that place when I was writing the scenes.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Question number 3. What lesson about writing or publishing do you feel like you had to learn the hard way?
I think probably that finding a literary agent is the equivalent of finding a leprechaun riding a unicorn at a Red Sox victory parade in the 1960s. It was, I didn't get responses.
Yeah.
I got one response out of all the ones I sent out. And it's always been hard to me to figure why no one jumped on a book about Shakespeare written by a college basketball coach. That's a hard one. But it was tough.
Mm-hmm. I have to say our high school football coach, not that I played high school football, but at the high school where I went to, was a guy named Mr. Bill. He was this big jacked guy. I mean, the guy, he was like scary. He was scary. Like he had this big beard, scary guy. But he was also the English teacher. And he had such a thing for Shakespeare. It was like so cool to see this like completely different side of him. I mean, there was your angry Mr. Bill with the whistle and the clipboard, and they're very tight shorts. I don't know why he decided to wear those shorts, but they were very, very tight.
They were a thing.
They were a thing. And, you know, I knew that he was circumcised. Don't ask me how. But I'm kidding about that. You can't make these jokes when he went to a Catholic school. But he had the thing for Shakespeare, and he turned us all on to Shakespeare, you know, and I'm no Shakespearean scholar, but just his enthusiasm for Billy Shakespeare was kind of contagious. And I remember he taught us, a number of them, but I remember Othello very well. And that one, like, I remember writing a paper for him, and I have a twin brother named Jimmy. And Jimmy was like the English guy. I was the math guy. That's how my parents sort of typecasted us. And Jim always did well in English. But I wrote a paper on Othello, on Iago, and
Best villain in Shakespeare.
oh my God, it was so great. And just like how his evil spreads like a seed and how he plants seeds. I still remember this paper this was 1988, maybe 89. Yep. And I remember he didn't hand my paper back right away. Everyone else got theirs, and he held it up like to basically say how good it was. And I was no like English scholar, but I just had this creative idea for it. And I remember my brother was pissed because he was he was used to getting the praise for those things. And there we go. I never forgot Mr. Bill O'Connell.
That's a good place to start. You know, it's funny that you have to have someone like that actually inspires you a little bit. Like every high school kid starts out reading Julius Caesar, and it's no wonder that nobody likes it. Like if everybody started out watching Twelfth Night, more people would like Shakespeare and enjoy it.
Yeah.
But starting out with Julius Caesar, that's not the way it should go.
That's a tough one. But you're right. I mean, in terms of encouragement for writers, and this is a theme that has come up in so many of these interviews, it's having somebody in your life who encouraged you at one point in time to do it. That's like one of the golden nuggets that I have from New York Times bestselling authors to people who are just starting out. It's, hey, I had this third grade teacher who saw something in me and encouraged me to kind of do something. And that's we all need more encouragement in this world, but certainly one of the themes I've heard. All right, point number 4. Here we go. What's the best piece of advice you would give to an aspiring author? So somebody who kind of wants to do what you've done kind of 2 times over now. What would you tell an aspiring author?
I don't know that I'd be so presumptuous as to give advice at this point, unless asked. I'd be much more inclined to give it to a middle school or high school basketball player. But I definitely would tell them to be ready to work. I was joking I wasn't joking. I was being scolded by my wife the other day about, what's next for this book? Like, how do I get it out? These companies, these publicists, they want all this money to do all these things. And, every once in a while you hear a story about someone that, I think it was the book Once a Runner. The guy used to go to cross country meets, track meets, and sell the book out of the trunk of his car. I'm going to get this wrong, but Jonathan Livingston Seagull, I think the guy got rejected 42 times and then ended up selling, 1 million copies. And I think like, if you're not ready to work, like to promote yourself and the book and get ready for your friends and family to be the only ones who read it.
Right.
Because that's the hard part for me is like, I love coaching basketball. I love parenting my children. I would not be in love with throwing the books in the trunk of my car and going to the Lebanon Shakespeare Festival.
Yeah. The other thing I'll add, I'll give you a build onto the advice you could give, because there was a couple of things you just said in our conversation that I take away as interesting points. Number one, to do research, you track down, a professor it was University of Hartford, right?
Yep.
To pick his brain and just to kind of run stuff by. Not saying that you're focus grouping the idea, but you're getting input as you go, as you kind of go along. And that's a great way to bring authenticity to any piece of work. But the other thing that you mentioned is taking that trip to England to do a little research and experience things firsthand. I'd say that's another piece of advice you could offer. Now I'm answering my own questions for you, but but it just kind of strikes me. Also, that's not a bad tax deduction because you can write that off as research. So just something to keep in mind.
Yes, very important. Too long ago.
Moving on. Is there anything you're capable of doing now that you weren't able to do before you wrote this book?
I don't think so. I think there's a lot less I can do now than when I wrote this book. That's how it feels advancing in age. Even reading is getting harder. I got to switch classes and figure out where the contacts are. And So that's kind of a hard question. I'm going to have to lay down on that one.
All right.
Something I can do now that I couldn't do when I started the book.
Maybe a media tour, podcasts. One of the things that people tell me is that like doing stuff like this, the promotion of the work is sometimes harder, or oftentimes harder than actually the writing of it. What's your experience on the advertising and marketing side? Just trying to get word of your book out there, kind of beyond friends and family.
I'll go back one. Now that you reframed it, I think I could probably teach Hamlet anywhere.
All right.
That's one of the things that, and I had read it a couple of times before doing this, but not that it isn't, I think everybody is like a Hamlet person or a Falstaff person that really likes Shakespeare, and I'm a Hamlet person. So sorry to just backtrack for a second. The marketing and advertising, like what has it been like?
Yeah, I mean, what did you learn about like that part of this? Like, it's almost like the business side of writing and publishing. That's what people tell me they struggle with the most, versus the writing side of it.
Yeah, I learned that I don't know enough about it, and honestly, it seems like I might have to hit you up with some emails for some suggestions about what the best ways are to go about it. Certainly, I'm thankful for this opportunity, but it's hard because like if you don't have someone that's immediately interested, if you haven't been asked to write a book because you were X, most of what they do is you really can't find. I'd take anyone who was like, hey, I'll market your book, I'll get the publicity out, and we split everything 50-50, 60-40. I'd say everybody goes, we'll do a 6-week publicity campaign. It'll run you $8,000. And who's motivated to do publicity once you already have the check in your pocket?
Yeah, I'll tell you,
it's the most backwards thing, and I'm sure people do it all the time with a lot of great hope, but it's hard for me to take that leap of faith, for sure.
No, I mean, you're talking to somebody who did one of those deals, and it didn't work out in my favor. So I would caution against such a thing. You mentioned being, being a Hamlet guy. When I was in high school, my senior year English class, it's amazing I didn't get why I studied psychology in college. I have no idea. I should have gone into film or something else. But instead of doing a final paper on Hamlet for Mr. Tom Criz, who was a great English teacher, I wrote a movie called Hamlet and Horatio's Bogus Journey. And I mean, obviously inspired by Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, but I also put an element of quantum leap in there because Hamlet and Horatio leave, their time, and then they go into modern times, wind up in like, I'm laughing even thinking about it, but yeah. So if I can find a copy of that somewhere, I know I've got a box of VHS tapes. If I can find a copy of that somewhere, I will send it to you just for a critique to see if I had a modern adaptation of Hamlet right.
Well, it's an interesting take. I'm sure you remember from the class that actually happens. Like at one point he's 18 and then he comes back and he's 30. And so you're not too far off.
Right. Well, there was some basis of we tied it into the story somehow. Maybe we also got a good dick joke in there that went under the radar. Oh boy, enough about that. My co-star of that movie was a guy named Brent Bodick, who was also an SAE, but he went to where did he go? University of Rhode Island. So he was same fraternity as those other guys we were talking about earlier, but different school. Question number, I've lost count here. Let's call it number 7. If you could whisper any words of advice to your younger self, I call this the Brad Paisley letter to me question, right? So letter to me is the song where he writes the letter to his younger self, kind of reassuring him about stuff that's how his life is going to turn out. What if you could write a letter to your younger self, what kind of advice would you give your younger self?
It would be a 3-word letter, and it would say, go to class.
Make it down to Vonner Maiden at 8:00 in the morning on Monday.
Yep. I thought because I had the book in my hands and the teachers gave the questions, I could write the essay just from the book without attending when I chose not to. And I soon learned that all the answers were given away in class. Surprise, surprise, that they're actually up there talking about what they'd like to hear in return. And so my first, 2.5 semesters at least of college were like a throwaway. I was fortunate enough to get a couple of really good professors in the English department my junior and senior year, or I should say my senior year and my second senior year, who made it a lot more fun. And that was, I think the problem for me is that I was like 22 when I was finally figuring out how to be 18,
right?
And somewhat responsible. So that would definitely be the first thing I said to me.
Yeah. Were you fortunate enough to ever take anything with either Sam Pickering or Wally Lamb when you were at UConn?
Well, it's funny. I never took anything with Pickering because he was all 8 a.m. classes, but Wally Lamb was my high school creative writing teacher.
No kidding.
Yeah. So when you were talking about someone that inspires you early on, it was just a little nudge. He was still teaching at Norwich Free Academy when I was also teaching there, but he was a teacher when I was a student. So I got a good dose of Wally early on. And it's funny, one of the things he said to me after Oprah picked up She's Come Undone, I said, what are you working on? And he said, I'm too busy being an author to be a writer. And he kind of laughed because he's going around doing all these. And I think about it all the time now because, man, I give anything to have that problem right now.
Right. That's a great quote. That's a great quote. I had a lot of courses in Arjona, just given its proximity to the psych building. So I was psych major. A lot of my upper division courses were there. And I used to I remember standing outside his office and seeing the name Wally Lamb. And then, of course, years later, when She's Come Undone is like a huge hit, I'm like, yeah, oh my goodness, I was like outside that guy's office all the time.
I did. My favorite professor there was Gina Barreca, who was incredible. She would like go from an English accent to a Rocky Balboa impersonation in the course of one sentence and 3 hyphens. And she, I think my wife's never read it, but Professor Barreca wrote my wife's favorite book entitled Perfect Husbands and Other Fairy Tales. Right. And I'm sure that my wife would love it and consider it her favorite.
That's a great title. Pickering, for those in the audience who don't know, the character in what was the Robin Williams movie?
Dead Poets Society.
Dead Poets Society that Robin Williams played was based on Sam Pickering. At least parts of his persona were based on Sam Pickering, and he actually spoke at the only time I ever met the man I was fortunate enough to get into Phi Beta Kappa, and he spoke at that induction ceremony. And I was thinking to myself, like, it's my senior year. It's like spring of my senior year. And I'm like, why I did everything all wrong. I did everything all wrong. I went to class, but, still it's like, I could have done things differently. All right. Last question in the hot seat. Easy one. What's the best movie about a plane crashing into the Hudson River?
Whew. That is pretty challenging. It's a lot like the high school wrestling movie.
Yep, and the arm wrestling movie.
I'm gonna have to go with Sully.
Okay, there you go.
And that's it right there. The powerful play goes on, and that's my verse.
There you go. That's
movie
your
named after me.
There you go.
It really wasn't that hard. People make a big deal about it. Like as long as you don't open the rear doors, you're good.
Yeah.
And Teterboro was way too far away.
Too far. We're going on the Hudson. Well, this has been fun. I'm sure there's a lot of people thinking to themselves, hey, where can I get this book, Tilting with Lips, by this author, William Sully Sullivan? So where can people go to pick it up? You can Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. I think you can save a couple nickels on Archway Publishing. On their website, they have links to all the books, and just Archway Publishing, Tilting with Lips, and those are the easy spots to grab it. Very good. Any social media handles you want to call out if people want to reach out to you on socials? Anybody can reach me at 220, 221. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. All right. Well, Sully, this is good. I was very happy that we connected, and I wish you all the best with this book.
Likewise. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Yep.